Chocolate Yoddah here, spelled Yoddah, because film studios are litigious. Just had a quick thought. I shared something real briefly earlier, and I wanted to come back to it. And, hopefully there's some folks out there who might join me. So I'll quickly go over what I heard earlier and just kind of set the stage for what I might say about it. I'm not exactly sure what I'm going to share about it yet, but I know the general topic. So it's sort of about masculinity, but hopefully not in an obvious way. So I was listening to a wisdom talk earlier. I will not mention who it was because it's not important, and I'm not looking to throw anybody under the bus or start a controversy or anything. And these remarks are not personal anyway. They're not directed toward anyone. They're just really about what I heard. And it was a simple thing. One lady was talking to another lady about just the heat and how this guy was trying to alleviate the heat and make himself comfortable, just basically stop his discomfort. And one of the suggestions about how he could do that, and again, I don't want to get specific here, but the response to that suggestion was that would be too girly, right? Now, I don't think there was anything meant in a bad way by that, but it instantly sparked something in my brain because this is the kind of pressure that men live under and women never have to think about. And it's not a bad thing. I'm not saying you're wrong for this. This is just how it is, right? Men and women are different. We operate in different ways. We think differently. We feel differently. We process reality differently. And I say, vive la différence. I'm glad men and women are different, right? Because I happen to be attracted to women. So that's cool, right? But it's these little comments that we hear throughout our lives, and it becomes frustrating because something like that is like, really? I can't even do something to alleviate my discomfort without my masculinity being attacked? And we hear stuff like this all the time. And I referenced earlier that I was watching a podcast, and I've seen this many, many times, where someone, either a man or woman, will ask a female panel, can your significant other cry in front of you? And the answers are really far-ranging, right? To me, the simple answer, of course, is yes, but it's not that simple, right? Because what I heard these women saying, and there were like 4 or 5 women, well, yeah, he can cry sometimes, or he can cry for a specific reason, like if his mother dies. But if he's just a dude crying all the time, that's a problem. Or if he cries too much about something, and of course we don't know what that means. We don't know what too much means. How much crying is too much crying? We don't know, right? And we get this kind of messaging for our whole lives. Oh, we want you to be sensitive, but not too sensitive, right? And again, this is so subjective. It varies from woman to woman. What is too sensitive exactly? How much is just the right amount of sensitive? Can I be in touch with my emotions? Can I cry if I'm sad? Maybe, but it's a big maybe. Because if I cry in a way that's wrong, or a way that this woman judges to be too much crying, well, there's going to be a problem. And it becomes very frustrating for men to live this way, to have these unclear guidelines, these unclear rules that are basically made up from nothing and are inconsistent. Those are 2 strikes right away, right? Like I saw an interview that Joe Rogan had with a female, I think she's a female UFC fighter, and she happened to be in a relationship with a male UFC fighter. And she described that when he got knocked out in the ring, the way he fell turned her off. I'm not making this up. Because he put out his hands in a way that was not masculine to her. She got turned off to him. And this is the kind of stuff that men have to deal with. You know, we have all these things, all these requirements of us. We can't just show up and look good. We've got to make more money. We've got to be taller. We've got to be a leader. We've got to do all these things. We've got to protect you, which means putting our lives on the line for you. And we have a guest, Amos Waterbury. I don't believe I have ever spoken to you before, Amos. Welcome aboard. What's happening?
Probably haven't spoken to me before. I've been using the app for a while though, so it depends when you got your check mark. I said I might have seen you before, but I don't know. When did you get that?
I have no idea. I don't know. I think I in the very beginning when I found the app, I got an email about it. But anyway, check mark or not, what's happening?
Yeah. I actually have one, but this is my second account because I couldn't get in my first one, and I was like, man, that sucks. They could have worked on that a little better as far as it accessing your account. Because what happened is I had an Android, so I couldn't get into my Apple account with the Android. Unfortunately. But anyways, be that as it may, I like this account too. So, I love your name. First off, I love Star Wars. Uh, but I noticed you had. Is that spelled Yoda or is it Yoddah or something? I'm making sure I didn't make a.
You are pronouncing it correctly the first time, which is Yoda. I spell it Yodddah because film studios are litigious.
Ah, gotcha.
And by the way, Star Wars didn't invent the name.
What, of Yoda?
That's correct.
Well, I mean, George Lucas did, but.
No, he didn't.
Okay. That's news to me. I thought he created it.
He did not. It's a Sanskrit word, and it means hero or warrior.
Oh, okay. Well, that makes sense. Well, he just invented the character Yoda and then used that name. That makes perfect sense now. Okay. Learn something every day. Wow. So, anyways, I was just kind of going through my list or whatever because everybody I talked to first, instead of going right into the subject, I introduced myself. So, now that I know about you, with me, I've been on the app and frankly just on here because I love to hear people's wisdom. I mean, I know that sounds cliche, but that's pretty much why I'm on here, and I like to pass wisdom down that I think that I've gained. But what my best thing that I like is fishing. Um, see, airplanes, music. So
Long walks on the beach. What are your turnoffs and turn-ons? I mean, you know, we could spend a lot of time talking about a lot of different things. So, would you like to weigh in on the subject matter?
yeah, I was about to get there. And as far as what you're saying about men and women, I think the main reason why there's a stereotype is because uh, in fashion, especially back in the 18th century, the woman was the status of where obviously she was just the homemaker and everything about her is pristine and, perfect. There can't be anything wrong with her, right? Um, and men, we're on the side of, unfortunately, we had a bad name, but we also had to look good under that bad name.
Wait, can you clarify that for me? What do you mean by bad name?
So, are you aware of like scandals and stuff like that back then?
Possibly, but what when you say men had bad names, what does that mean?
A bad name meaning a bad reputation, not because that they really chose to, but let's say they were associated with somebody with a scandal or a situation. And unfortunately, the way society worked is it was gossip town, right? And so we basically went from back at the 18th century, and some of that's still come over here. So men, like you're saying, they don't have the freedom to be themselves, and in some states, or I'm not referring to like states, but like in some circumstances, uh, women, you can go as far as to say they don't have as much freedom as they should have. But the reason why they have more freedom is because, um, I don't know, I guess women are speaking out, and so more women are supporting them. Uh, and then you got men over here where we're still stuck with, like you're saying. I mean, crying is something that happens when it's an emotional attachment to how you feel. So if I cry a lot, does that make me any less of a man? Or is it just the fact that that's just biologically how I'm wired? Like me, I don't cry a lot. So sometimes I'll literally get in my mind and I'll be like, man, I'm such a jerk, or is there something wrong with me? And then I have to realize, well, no, just because other men cry doesn't mean that I have to cry. So it's kind of like, if you cry, you cry. It's human interaction. Um, if you don't cry, but you feel empathetic and sympathy and stuff, that's how your body does it. So status quo is really taken over as far as being the main thing, at least for me in my eyes, because I grew up in a pretty sheltered home, so I've only seen a little bit here and there, but I've also seen movies. Like I love Jane Austen because there's some just she's an awesome writer, but I don't know. I kind of like folklore and stuff like that. Um, and I had no idea that back in the 18th century, back then, that gossip was kind of just like that rampant. It was like crazy. Like everybody knew everybody's finances, and it was just nuts. So this whole idea is not too surprising that men, um, we don't have any more freedom now than what we did back then because it's gotten worse. Um, and it's to the point where some men are wanting to become women on like being gay, and then that's
Well, let's backtrack for a second. When you said it's becoming worse, what is the it that you are referring to?
oh, so the antithesis of being a man. Like I feel like the best times for a man would probably been after World War II, and then when things were basically he was doing pioneering, whether he was a farmer or working in a shop, creating his own businesses and stuff like that. And that was when the man was just there, and the woman during that time was supportive, didn't, you know, knock him down. And I don't know, maybe there were some that were not as supportive as others. But it just seemed to be the strongest point in history with men where they were being men. And then now it's, going forward, it's crazy. And I don't know if that's.
Yeah, you're speaking in generalities. So when you say it's crazy, what does that mean?
Oh, I'm sorry. It's 3:35 in the morning, so my mind might be trying to say something that I mean. Crazy. The specific thing that I'm speaking of is how we went from, where the man is the provider and everything like that. The woman was okay with that, and there wasn't any problem. And then at some point in time, the woman was like, "Oh, so you're saying that just because I'm a woman, uh, I can't do what you do, right?" And then we got this whole feminism thing, which then puts another bad light on men, and we start being labeled as, a bully or being non considerate or, I don't know.
Right. Well, it sounds like you're shooting back and forth through history, and kind of conflating some separate things together. The original feminist movement was about equality, and it was correct for them to want that because they didn't have it.
Well,
So if
I'm not talking about then. That back then was good because the men were doing what they were doing, right? But I'm talking about, if you notice in today's society, when we say something, we can't even like give a compliment, and then all of a sudden, sometimes it's even considered as sexual harassment, and it's just like, are you freaking kidding me? And it's just, men can't be men, like you were saying. It's like,
oh no, I didn't say that at all. But I understand the implication of what you're saying. Um, I don't experience it myself because I am me. No matter what the vagaries of society have to say about that. But again, I do get the implication that you're trying to make.
gotcha. Well, thankfully, I haven't really had to experience it myself. I grew up in, like I said, it was a spiritual home. We grew up in church, and um, thankfully, most of my life, if I've had to deal with it, is just because I was in the world. But for the most part, I've come across women that understand me, and I understand them. And my mom taught me that no matter what a woman says, never let them, like change you or try to influence you, because you are who you are as a man. Like who your dad teaches you, if he's a good man, which my dad, he didn't do everything right, but man, I sure love a lot of stuff that he passed on to me. And one of the things is you just don't, let somebody change you unless it's necessary to be changed. And so, thankfully, I was brought up in a good standing in that. So yeah, I'm with you. But I've also noticed it's just, I don't know. It's even crazy where we're at right now. Like, why is masculinity starting to blend with like femininity? Like, that's even confusing to me.
Well, it's not. You bring up an excellent point and an excellent question, but just because there's some loud voices in society doesn't mean that what they're talking about is necessarily real. And we live in an age where communication and self-expression has become more democratized than ever because we've got these giant social media platforms. Wisdom is one of them, where there's virtually no barrier for entry beside the basics of having a phone. And whether it's Facebook or Instagram or Twitter or X or whatever the hell Elon Musk is going to call it tomorrow, but you there's no barrier to entry, right? So anyone can express themselves, and sometimes the minority voices sound like majority voices in that context, but they're not necessarily.
Okay. So I guess my question would be like, what do you think is the best thing that we can do, on the man's side? Um, well, let's say I say something, to a girl, right? And they'll be like, well, I kind of consider that offensive, and it's nothing like where I'm trying to be offensive. I just say something masculine, and then they consider it offensive. And let's say it just has to do with like the workforce.
All right, so you're slowly creating smaller and smaller concentric circles. So I want to keep this broad. So the beginning of your question, I think, is a great place to start, which is, what do we do as men? And my short answer, and you're running out of time, and I have someone else in queue, so let me just first thank you for participating and weighing in. But my short answer is just continue to be authentic, right? So my stance on my masculinity is, number one, like anything else, first do no harm. So I don't want to wield my masculinity like a blunt instrument, but after that, then I just want to be authentic.
Awesome.
And
Hey, it's been a
my
pleasure. Thanks, by the way.
you're welcome. And my that I think is critical, and that sometimes gets lost in the sauce. Christopher, come on up, my friend. I'm definitely interested in your take on this. You are a learned man.
For sure. I wanted to originally just share an experience about where I really came to realize what you're talking about. But
Mm-hmm.
I do really need to make a statement just kind of based off of your last guess, and hopefully you'll allow me that. It's real
Oh,
quick.
please.
I just want to put out there, if you are a man and if you are ever feeling in a position where you don't feel like you can talk to a woman or you don't feel like you can compliment a woman without risking a sexual assault charge or sexual harassment, I'd really encourage you to spend some time just really analyzing what you consider a compliment or how you're talking to people. Because honestly, that's never something I've had to contend with in my entire life, professional or otherwise. So I'm just going to leave it at that.
No, and by the way, that is an absolutely excellent point. And were I his coach, that would have been that would have been a conversation. So yes.
It's not an uncommon saying. I hear it all the time, but be that as it may. So I kind of want to talk about what you're talking about before your last guest came up was just the concept of like men crying.
Mm-hmm.
And so, I've always, as I think most men know, that there is kind of this social construct about how men need to behave, the masculinity you talked about, and crying is definitely not one of those things that falls under that. And so obviously I've known that, but when I really experienced it firsthand, I was actually at a hair salon with my girlfriend at the time. She was getting her hair cut, and I was just kind of listening to the talk that goes along there. And in the next chair over, they're talking about how she was probably breaking up with her boyfriend. And they've been on and off. And her biggest complaint was that every time they have these conversations about breaking up, is that he just starts crying. And kind of the consensus between the women there were basically on one of two sides. One, either if he's crying all the time in this situation, then he's, for lack of a better word, wuss, and you should probably leave
Mm-hmm.
him to go find a real man,
Mm-hmm.
or he's doing it to manipulate you. Like those were the only possible areas that it could fall in their mind.
Yeah.
And that's when it really dawned on me that this is like a real thing that affects not only the general society on how men hold each other accountable for being masculine, but also how women kind of support that idea by, selecting men who also fit into that role of what they call masculinity. And it blew me away. Like there was no other possibility. Like if the woman was in that situation and the man was the one that was breaking up with them and the woman started to cry, there would be no question because that's a logical emotional reaction to have to that situation. The situation
Right.
didn't change. It's just a man that's crying. So why is that different?
Right. Well, a lot of that obviously has to do with culture. It has to do with these rules that cultures create. And very few people ever consider the source of these rules. Some of them are Judeo-Christian. Some of them come from old thinking or whatever. And the thing that I say pretty frequently is, why would I take my cues from a dysfunctional society? And I'm speaking specifically of America because that's where I am. But like, if America's rules and let's call them prescriptions led to happy people, then I would consider what they were saying. But generally, that's not the case. I mean, it's one of the most unhappy places in the world. And, so many drugs to handle this unhappiness, and so much dissatisfaction, and so much emptiness, and so much loneliness. And, and it's like, all of your constructs have not created a positive environment for you. So I'm going to go ahead and reject those constructs. Because that's really what you're talking about. Like when these women are sitting around debating on whether a human emotion is appropriate, it's like, well, blame 350 million years of evolution. Because do we think that we have these emotions by accident? Like, this is how we evolved. It's sort of like, I did this short piece on Steve Harvey because I think he's an idiot. And I have heard him say a lot of idiotic things over the years, but the thing that got me upset was when he did one of his interstitials on his dumb talk show, and he said, successful people don't sleep 8 hours a day. And I was like, all right, dude, now you're going to start killing people.
Right.
By giving that kind of advice, because it's like, we branched off from lobsters somewhere around 350 million years ago. And let's fast forward 6 million years ago, we start taking our form, and we've been solidly in this iteration of our form for about 300,000 years. But you know better than evolution. We don't need to sleep, according to the fucking genius Steve Harvey. Okay? So it's like, hey, folks, this is our wiring. Like I remember very quickly when my son was somewhere around 1.5 or 2 years old, and he was crying, and my mother said to him, boys don't cry. And I took her aside and I said, if you ever say anything like that to my son again, you will never see him again. He will cry when he wants, how he wants, for whatever reason, and for however long he wants. I was obviously triggered in that moment.
But rightly so.
Yeah. But that's what it is. It's like we have these emotions. They're not by accident. We all need to be able to express those emotions. And it's all these goofy social rules that have nothing to do with anything that have women concluding that, oh, if he cries too much, he's not masculine.
Sure. Yep. And what's interesting, I saw this video the other day. I do honestly feel like that very recently our society has actually started to push back against some of these concepts, especially with the idea of men being able to speak their emotions to people. And what I saw that really, when you see videos online, obviously they're edited and they're done deliberately, but I think it still speaks to the truth of the matter. The question was, when you are at your lowest, who do you call? Who do you turn to? Who do you talk to? And literally every man on that said pretty much the same thing. Either some version of nobody, or you talk to somebody, like you call somebody when you're feeling down, like surprise, right? And I think that is a scary, visual of what it means to be a man in society. And to kind of go with that, I want to just explicitly express that there are a lot of people, a lot of women and men who have this backlash against talking about this because for whatever reason, they've created this dichotomy where there can only be women's issues or there can only be men's issues. There can't be both, and they can't be talked about separately without somehow referencing the other. And I would just advise people to realize that there are a lot of crazy things that women go through. And when I say crazy, I mean literally irrational and things that shouldn't happen. But we can still talk about the things that happen with men without taking away from that. And that's what I think 100%. Needs to happen.
Yeah. No, I agree wholeheartedly about that. And, I know how fortunate I am because I have a consigliere, my best friend of 22 years. I know I can share everything with him. I share some things with my second ex-wife because she knows me better than any woman on the planet. And even though I don't unburden myself on my son, I can talk to my son about things because he's 38 years old and I'm only 21 years older than he is. And that is the sadness and isolation that I was referring to earlier. These people that just feel like they can't share, because men know, like, one of the fastest ways to get a woman turned off is to just share your emotions with her. You know, and women will claim that they want us to be sensitive until we're actually sensitive. And then it's a bad look, you know. So the first line of defense is, I always tell guys, don't risk it. No matter how cool you think your woman is, talk to your male friends, but definitely talk to somebody, but start with your male friends. And because that was the environment that I grew up in. Like, I was surprised to find out that men don't have outlets, because that's not how I grew up. When I was a teenager, my friends and I, we cried to each other all the time. You know, some chick, you know, hurt us or whatever, or we were just stressed out about something. We had each other to talk to. I didn't know it was different than that. And so that's the paradigm that I've been operating under. And then in 1987, when I was 23 years old, I got into personal development. So again, I got used to talking about my stuff, and that's how it's been for the last almost 36 years. So I know how fortunate I am to live that way.
Yeah. And I couldn't imagine what it would be like to grow up that way. I had it only in my father. My father was the only other person that I've ever been able to confide in. And for me, unfortunately, he passed away in 2020. And so I've really been dealing with that sense of loneliness of, okay, well, now I just have to deal myself, you know. But there are other outlets that I've been finding. And
Right.
I think that's what's important, is to break through that barrier of this construct that you can't talk to other people. You can. It's hard and it takes work, but you need to try, because it's unhealthy not to.
100%, you know. And as someone who's been coached and also coaches people, you know, I like to avoid the trap of falling in love with the sound of my own voice. And I think that's a trap that's easy to fall into, because, I mean, who are you going to believe more than yourself, right? But I found that it's so important to speak to other people, and hopefully, best case scenario is those are people who care about you on some level and want the best for you, and will never use that information to hurt you, which is part of the reason why, and I know this is going to seem regressive, but I tell men, don't share these things with your woman, because every man I know has at least one extraordinarily painful story of a woman using sensitive information to hurt him. So I default to, hey, make that your last choice. If you have no other options, then fine, but talk to everybody else before you talk to her, so that you can maintain the energy that she needs from you. And she's not wrong to need that energy. Women need masculine energy as much as men need feminine energy. And I agree with you again also on the idea that these are not always just exclusively male or exclusively female issues. Some of these are just human issues.
Yep. And I would actually say that even that right there, I don't think that you're necessarily wrong, but I would expand it. And I think that there was a question somewhere along the lines that I answered somewhere here on Wisdom, where I said basically the same thing. But in going with all people, like, I feel like sometimes people are too quick to call somebody friends. And I always tell people, yeah, that's fine and all, but be careful what you share with somebody until you see how they behave when they're angry at you. Right? Because then you
Right.
see who they really are, and you see what they're going to do and what they're willing to do. Don't give them the tools to hurt you until you can be fairly confident they're not going to.
Oh yeah, I talk about that. I have this this short piece that I did called "The Three Pillars of a Relationship," and they are social compatibility, sexual compatibility, and conflict resolution compatibility. Almost all of my relationships ended over conflict resolution compatibility, because now as a fairly rational adult, I'm a talker. So if a woman's a screamer, we're going to have an incompatibility there. And again, it's not that she's wrong and I'm right. It's just that I handle conflict one way and she handles conflict another way, and it's incompatible. And I agree with you wholeheartedly. Like, I say that it's like that old saying, in vino veritas, right? In wine, truth, but also you can substitute the word anger for wine, and that's when you find out who someone truly is. So that's an excellent point.
I find it interesting because I very much talked to something similar about your three pillars. I think the only difference is it sounds like you would have conflict resolution, and underneath of that would be included communication, whereas I would
Sure.
say communication, and underneath of that would be conflict resolution. But I think it's the
Yeah.
same
Either
thing.
way, it
So
works. Sure. Yeah.
yeah,
Absolutely. Yeah.
that's very
No.
interesting.
Communication is one of those things that I hear people talk about. I hear all these gurus talking about, oh, communication is key, but never has anyone followed up that statement with, and here are ways to communicate, because it's a skill. No one is born. I mean, I'll say very few people that I've ever met were just natural born communicators. Like, I know I had to learn it. I was terrible at communication when I was a young man, and I had to learn it. I had to practice it for years and years and years before I got better at it. This idea, oh yeah, just go communicate. Like, I saw my mother and stepfather communicate all the time. They were never having the same conversation.
Right. Well, there's not one way to communicate, right? Really,
Right.
the skill of communication is learning which form of communication works for the person you're speaking with. But anyways, I'm going to drop off here and listen to the rest of what you got to say. Thanks for having me up.
Oh man, thanks so much. Always a pleasure speaking with you. Yeah. When I was driving around earlier, I heard the two ladies speaking, and I did like a 2 or 3 minute response to it, but I wanted to expand on it. And I think we basically covered all our bases here. This is an important issue, and I think too many people that are self-proclaimed dating experts and relationship experts. I'll be honest, folks, most of the time that I listen to these people talk, it's stuff that I could learn in a Hallmark card, right? They're not giving me anything. And one of the things that they fail at very often is when they just toss out this generic idea of, yeah, the most important thing in a relationship is to communicate. And yeah, I agree. It's clearly a very important thing, but follow that up with how to communicate, the various ways, as Christopher alluded to, that there's more than one way to communicate. And I think it's important to learn as many as humanly possible so that you can be an effective communicator. And part of being an effective communicator is learning how to listen. Listen without agenda, listen without prejudice, and listen fully. Don't just listen to when the person stops talking so you can start talking. Really listen, try to understand, try to be empathetic as much as possible. And then that is the foundation for effective communication. And, don't fall into the trap. And I'm not trying to tell you how to live. I'm just speaking broadly. But, I think falling into the trap of these ideas that society just throws out. We're told, oh, these are traditions. And what I hear is dead people's decisions, right? Some of these traditions might not be appropriate for how life has changed. And I want to stress that life has changed just in terms of, the economy and technology and things like that. But humans are the same as they have always been. And we have to honor that. We have to honor these emotions that are built into us. We have to honor the fact that that the most important thing for most humans is connection with other humans. And if you don't believe me, just think about how lonely people were during the shutdown. If you don't believe me, just think about prison. You can take someone's liberty, put them in a cage where they're only allowed out a short time every day, and you put them in a building that's filled with thieves and murderers and rapists, but that is not the worst thing that you can do to that person. The worst thing that you can do to that person in prison is put them in solitary confinement. That's how important it is for human beings to have connection with other human beings. So that said, let me say hello to the folks that stopped by. North Star. It looks like North. Yeah, North Star. I like that. Lindsay Mae McKay. Elena Salina. Quitzy Phoenix, or Quitzy Phoenix. I'm not sure. Quitzy? Al A.J. Jones. Cosmic J. We heard from Christopher. Stephen Roche. We heard, or Roche, I'm not sure. We heard from Amos Waterbury and Dr. Robert James Goodman. All right, folks, it has been a delight. And this is a very unusual, very late night talk for me. But as I was driving home, I heard some stuff and I thought, you know what? I should jump on. So here I am. So with that said, folks, peace, love, and granola. Talk to you soon.